Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Vietnam. All right, so y'all are broing down, huh?
Bro down.
Yeah, we made some chicken thighs.
Sweet.
Yeah, it's been pretty
those, are,
good.
those are some of the
Man,
highlights.
Yeah, they're pretty good.
sounds pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Whew.
gotten.
hmm
I would say it's gotten pretty wild.
We watched Pride and Prejudice.
That's true. We did,
Oh man. Okay. I've never
and
seen it.
we've watched A River Runs Through It, which is an amazing movie. Both
Okay.
very good.
hmm
Totally different, but very good.
I based on your recommendation, Rob, I did read. I'm almost finished with Pride and Prejudice.
What do you
Never
think
read it
of it?
before. It's pretty fascinating. I like it. Um, I love that type of culture, but I did hear a critique that kind of colored the story for me, and I think it's kind of true. It's um like culture or custom without substance is empty, and it made me think of something like a Downton Abbey, like that type of a show. It's like so cool, the externals, but at the heart of it, it's like a kind of a soap opera drama.
Yeah, it's. I think Pride and Prejudice is a rom com. Like
Yeah.
that's.
Pretty much.
Yeah, it'd be something like that. That's probably a good way to put it.
Yep.
Yeah. But I do enjoy it. I like her writing. I like Jane Austen's writing, and I like the style of the characters.
Yeah. I think I'm most interested of all of it. I haven't formulated of still of why this is, but it's when I listened to the podcast Jane Austen for Dudes on with Brett McKay and some literature guy, um, they said that Jane Austen was very popular amongst World War One soldiers. I think we may have talked about this on the cast even, but the guy had this kind of hypothesis towards that of like they had seen such destruction and despair that there was something about the order of it, like kind of the elevated order of life in that they like very much desired when they just looked out and saw chaos from every which way. Um, I don't know. That one has in reading it, I was like, I don't know. I mean, there's things that have certainly spoken like more deeply to me than that, but I'm still intrigued by that comment, at least.
Sure, sure. What? Hey, Connor, was that the first time you'd seen it?
I read the book in high school. It was the first time I'd seen the movie. The
What
movie's
do you
pretty
think? Do you
recent, I
like it?
think.
Oh five.
I did like it, yeah. Um, I think compared to like a Brideshead, which I know is quite a bit later, I think, era-wise, but has the same sort of stuffy English vibe of like culture and custom um, being so, but the way that people would talk to each other was very elevated. Like if you wanted to say something biting, it would be in the most generous and kind of flowery way. You'd be complimenting somebody, but really saying like, "I despise you." There's one line where she said, "This was behind somebody's back, but it was her cousin who was such a lapdog bootlicker for the ornery old rich lady."
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and he said something like, "Oh, your cousin so and so knows my aunt very well, or my aunt gave him this blah blah blah," and she goes something like, "She couldn't have given him to a more grateful subject," and it just is like such an anodyne, almost nice thing to say, but in the context, you realize like, wow,
So
that is
biting.
so biting.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man.
So that kind of thing is kind of delightful, I think, but
I agree.
yeah, generally it is a love story, but um, it makes sense to me why World War One soldiers would gravitate towards it. Not unlike how I believe I heard that Therese of Lisieux became really popular with World War
Very.
One. Both of which are kind of like, I mean, hers couldn't be any more substantial,
Right.
spiritually and humanly. But it does have like the same outer crust of bourgeois propriety. Your problems are not as like apparently as serious as I'm being mustard gassed or have trench foot. like your father said something kind of upsetting about the shoes on Christmas morning, like that, and the depth of the suffering that you're experiencing. It seems like a soldier would be like, why does that matter? But that it speaks to their heart makes sense to me, because that really is, I mean, kind of your point about Peter Kreeft with the Lord of the Rings, and Samwise getting back to the Shire and his daughter sitting on his lap, like the whole journey. Anybody out at war is not like, this is reality. This is, everybody should experience this if they want to know what's really real. They're like, no one needs to experience this. What I really want is that, to jump up in my father's arms like Therese, or to, be totally in love like Darcy and Lizzie or whatever. That they're even in the midst of the deepest suffering, concentration camps, wars, whatever, stranded out at sea. I think these limit experiences, like these guys that, were torpedoed by the Japanese, the USS Indianapolis. You ever read that story? The ship where they were out there for like a week, just floating, being eaten by bull sharks. Like,
oh yeah.
Is that the Unbroken story?
No,
Louis
that
Zamperini?
too, is another Zamperini when he was out on the raft. But no, this was like the ship that actually delivered the A-bomb to Guam. After they left Guam, they were going down to Australia, maybe, I don't know, but they got a kamikaze submarine, sunk them, and like the whole ship was just floating there. And by some clerical error, they didn't realize for several days that they hadn't arrived, or that they were missing. And then they went and searched for them, and like several groups had split because of the tidal, whatever, the ocean currents made people drift. But yeah, those kind of things, like when there's homecoming, that's all anybody wants, is just the simple things of life, leisure and love and family. And
I would say, and if there's any more on that, but it's interesting. And I think I've shared this before. I think the set of books that I have maybe delighted in most reading back to back in like a juxtaposition is 2 or 3 summers ago, I read Little Women, and then I followed it up with Huckleberry Finn.
Okay, cool.
And like so much fun to read those in conjunction like that. But I'm reading now, so I finished Pride and Prejudice, and then my summer book is Lonesome Dove.
Yeah.
And it is really interesting. I don't even know. I'm like 12 hours into this thing, and it's way slower moving than even like a Steinbeck. Like it's so detailed, and just like the monotony of the characters. But I will give it to him. Like you do kind of get like brought into this. And that's been interesting, of just like part of some of like the harshness that's in their circumstances. It still allows for like just human connections to come out. I don't know, like just the juxtaposition between the two is very interesting, to the point of what we're talking about. So I can share more on that. I don't know that it fit exactly with the conversation, but it's just interesting of the two.
Yeah, I mean, could not be a more broad difference culturally.
Right.
Because I read Lonesome Dove, like, man, I think I tried to get after it in like 6th grade or something that, and made it maybe halfway through, and was so bored. I think I gave up on it. But it takes place in like kind of Western, before the states are totally like organized and civilized. It's like the Wild West, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like, it's kind of like not washed up old Texas Rangers.
Yeah. Okay.
Who are like maybe not purpose searching, but yeah, are kind of in like the sunset of life, if you will. And they just get up. They're down in Texas, and they just get up a cattle drive, and like are going to Montana. But it's a sweeping novel. My favorite part so far in it has been, I think I told this to Bisk, but there is one of the young cowboys dies pretty early on the drive from a snake bite. And Gus, who's like kind of the philosopher of the group, he just kind of goes right at it, and he makes them continue the
Mm-hmm.
drive.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to memorize the line, but he says something to the effect of like, sometimes life is so hard, all you can do is just kick your horse,
Hmm.
meaning like you can only go forward.
Yeah, right.
Which, yeah, it's so different than Jane Austen, but it's fun. It's like, it's so fun to there's principles that are actually consistent in both, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. You know, but there's also a juxtaposition to it in both of those. You know, Bisk, you pointed out it maybe in both of these that like coming home, almost nostalgic type feel, that there's a type of kind of like rest in it, um, that things come to a completion, and there's a type of like solidity. There's a type of I don't know, you just feel grounded in those books because you know exactly what the rules are. You know exactly how everybody plays. You know exactly where everybody ranks with each other, all this different stuff. But then in both Huck Finn and in Lonesome Dove, it's much more this like adventurous. It's not going home. It's kind of going out, and like to have both of those sides of the human dynamic where we do want to come home, but you better believe we want to explore. Like we want to do the adventure thing. We want to go out west. We want to see what our limits are, kind of a thing. So even that component to it, to have both of those things at play, um, I mean that's the Mark Twain story. Is like go out, have an adventure, um, yeah, see what your limits are. You know the limit case examples, and let's push it. Like let's go settle in a new place. Let's keep moving. Um, Yeah. So I like that. That's cool. The back to back reading of those books.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking the other night about why, if home is the destination, that's where we're all longing to just be home, then why do we leave home? Why the need for adventure? And I brought up, which neither of us have ever read, but the Joseph Campbell Hero's Journey book. I can't remember what it's called, but everybody always refers to it in podcasts.
I've never read it either. Should we talk about it?
Yeah,
For sure.
Let's dive in.
Have you heard about people talk? Have you heard people talk about it?
Mm-mm.
The Hero's
What's
Journey?
it called? Hero's Journey?
No, that's just what the thing is called that he talks about in it. But
Oh.
the myth of something. Wow. Some people are cringing. But, and I don't even know if this is what he talks about, but that, like, the idea when you watch a movie, I mean, I saw Guardians of the Galaxy 3 with my nephew and my brother a few weeks ago, and I'm like, this is a Christ narrative. This is the whole adventure of existence. It's always the same. You know?
Okay, good. Is it good? Is it worth a watch?
Really good. I thought I
Cool.
cried a couple times.
Nice. Sick.
Yeah. No, it's just like, why for there to be an adventure, for there to be an actual story, there must be this tension of like leaving home, having some trauma upset your order. So, and then you have to respond in a heroic way, even though you are limited and it will cost you your life ultimately, but then some new life will bubble up, you know,
Mhm.
a new way of being and existing, which is more full. And now you can rest because all has been accomplished. And,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so what was the conclusion to the answer? If we're made for home and that's what we really desire, why the need for adventure?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's why we're talking about it now, man.
No, but
We thought you
this
knew.
came up with actually we were talking about River Runs Through It, because that very much is like a Cain and Abel prodigal son story. These two sons. Oh no, did it disconnect? Or are we still coming through the thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think we're
Okay,
good.
great. Yeah. So that's just a straight up true story from Norman MacLean's life. It's the story of his brother and his father.
Oh, really?
Yeah, those are just. He wrote 3 stories. He was a University of Chicago literature professor. Never really wrote any short stories.
Wow.
And then I think he taught poetry, and his grandchildren asked. He used to tell these stories from turn of the century Montana, where he grew up, and his children and grandchildren were like, "You need to write those stories down." And in his old age, he wrote the story of the summer he was a lookout for the Forest Service. The summer he did logging yeah, which is hilarious. The guy it was old crosscut saws that they would
Oh yeah.
go log the mountains with, and so you had a partner, and his partner was this guy Jim, who was outrageous. And he was a Presbyterian minister's son, so like being in this culture, it's very. Actually, I identified with it a lot, coming like from the suburbs of Chicago, going out to fight fires for a couple seasons, just like the rough and tumble
Yeah.
culture, and how shocking but also attractive and helpful in my maturation that was. But then the river runs through it is the story of his family and his brother's struggles with alcohol and gambling and stuff. But yeah, the need to leave home. Even Norman, who's the elder brother in the prodigal son story, he needs to prove himself. He needs to leave Montana and his mother's side and his father's watchful eye to go prove himself in the world and do something. And we're talking about at the end, like there's a sadness in him that was not in Paul, his younger brother, who died an untimely death, but in a way avoided certain kinds of suffering that Norman now has to deal with in his old age. It's like he's the only one left with any of these stories, but he's standing in the river of time and the river of life, experiencing this like abundance that keeps flowing and yet is always passing away. That's kind of how I read that. And he's in the solitude of that being, but feels that connection. That's why he's haunted by waters. He's like stands in this river and he feels their story and his part in their story. And it's very beautiful, but it's very sad. I mean, the end of the movie I find very sad.
Oh, I don't know if I would call it sad. There's like a interesting.
Yeah.
You're talking
Rob
about
fell
that.
asleep. So.
I slept through most of it, but it's a great movie. It's so good.
Dude, Rob, you are such an old soul.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Like,
Thank you.
that is hilarious. You fell asleep during A River Runs Through It.
Yeah, I did.
That's awesome. Dude, that makes me want to put on some golf and just take a nap and just like watch some golf. Dang. Yeah, I mean, what's that story, Into the Wild, where the guy goes off into Alaska and dies up there like a mile from civilization, and his big realization once he gets out there is that he wants to go home, that life is about relationship. And I think so I wonder if we have the potential to delight and receive the goodness of home without having gone through an adventure.
Yeah.
And so there's a type of necessity, not just in growth of an individual, but even the perception of life that you have to kind of play out in order to actually rest in home, like fully, or in order to make a home fully. That if you don't go through some of those things and allow parts of you to die so that new life can be regenerated, if you do get home and you're like, this isn't that great, you're like, no, this is everything you're made for. You're just not ready to receive it yet.
That's how I read the prodigal son story. Both of the sons have that struggle. Like they are objectively home, which we are too. We are always in God. In him we live and move and have our being. We are home, but we can't live there for some reason. There's this thing that keeps us from remaining home, and it's in going out into the desert to mix the Bible stories. But you have to like leave this place of comfort and security because this is not actually your home. You're in some slavery. You have to leave and have these ties severed, and to be attached to the one who is home completely. But that's the cross and resurrection thing. Like the way to life is death. The way to the promised land is the desert. I think that's what we're seeing in those good stories is why, and this is the great divorce thing we're talking about too, that Lewis points out, like if the story ends in glory, even if the story was suffering and all this evil that occurred, it's part of a good story. It's all telling a story that is a good one because it ends with this new life and this union at the end. But if it ends and you are severed from life, you've really actually chosen the isolation of hell. even if you appeared to have lived a good life and had
Right.
everything that you needed, it was actually a bad story.
Yeah, it's a tragedy.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, and that's why, it's one of those things that I think it's the both and, where, and you see this play out in philosophical ideas, but um, somebody who's completely destination oriented is, it's true, like you just said, like that's what it's all about ultimately. But then somebody who's like, oh, it's all about the journey, man. Like
mhm.
it's the journey of life. That's what it's all about. Is also super true. That's also 100% true. Like if you don't journey well, the destination is not going to be the same. But the destination is what it's all about.
Mhm.
And so even that tension that's there, I think is kind of like a both and. That it is all about the journey, but it is also all about the destination.
Yeah. Or just even if maybe there's not an answer to it, but just there are guiding principles of like, just simply we've talked a fair amount to the last few days of just the primacy of relationship, like in your whole life. Cause even when we were talking about the hero's journey and like, take Huck Finn, which is like certainly that kind of like setting out into adventure and all of that. But I was thinking, it's like, man, like It's a Wonderful Life and the George Bailey story, like that's a hero's journey too,
Yep.
in a completely different narrative and path. But it's all about him finding home and like realizing where home is.
Yeah.
And so, but the consistency between the two is the primacy of relationship that's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hmm.
So that's what I'm saying is that like the prodigal son, those two guys are home, but they are not. There's something in them that is incomplete where they cannot rest in the relationship. The younger son thinks the reason I'm restless is because I need to go out and take these gifts and put them at the service of this world and see what I can become, see what I can get out of life. The elder son is stuck at home and feels he's a slave to his father and has to keep earning his keep, and maybe one day he'll get what he's looking for with a goat and whatnot. But what the father says to them is or he says to the older brother, but it applies to both. To me, is so mysterious. Like I don't really know what it means. But you are always with me. Everything I have is yours.
Yeah.
That's like the answer to all of it somehow. But I don't know how to receive that, and which is the cause of my suffering. I think. But someday we'll hear that, and that's home. We'll be able to rest in that. You are always with me. Everything I have is yours. And Jesus says it all the time. Like in the Last Supper discourse, when he's promising the Holy Spirit, he'll take everything I have and declare it to you. Ask for whatever you want in my name, and it will be granted to you. Like there's nothing that doesn't already belong to you. So why do we go out and try to earn it? Why do we go out and fight? And um, it's clearly not to win some battle in the world, so that we can have the peace like externally, like anything we believe that like I'm not in the right place, or the people aren't doing what I want them to do, or if we just had this or that, some future state of bliss, then I would be happy. But it's kind of like the Adam Sandler thing in Saturday Night Live, where he's that travel agent. And he's like, we can take you to Tuscany, but if you are unhappy in Massachusetts, you will be unhappy in Tuscany.
Yeah.
You will
Right.
still be the same you no matter where you
Yeah.
go.
I don't think I've heard that before.
It's
It's
great.
really funny,
Yeah,
but
it's really funny.
it hits on something so universally true. And
That is, yeah.
um, it's not your circumstances; it's some interior thing that's being worked out. That's home. But that's how we come home. Augustine said in his thing, you were within, and I was without. How late have I loved you? Like it was that invitation in to to his home, so to speak, his heart, where God was there with him, ordering his passions, ordering his life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very the universal thing is real as well. Then even I was thinking of like how would someone like a Peterson try and answer that question too, of like whether it's how you find the hero's journey or whatever we're talking about, and it's just this is a very broad, simple point, but like even it, yeah, there's many fascinating things about him and his work, but like just the how popular his first book is, the 12 rules, like which are not answers, they're rules for an
Mhm.
antidote to chaos. um and like one of my favorites of those is like, what is it, like you should seek what is meaningful and not what is expedient.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so again, it's just like it's just this principle based, like maybe even observation more than guide, in that. But it's engaging, I think, the same type question at least.
Yeah. Yeah. I know he makes an interesting point, and he uses politicians as the subject to illuminate the point, but he'll talk about people that get into um, helping others, serving others in the political sphere from like positive motive, and they quickly realize that like a lot of the game is corrupt, and so they'll play along with the types of corruption with the goal to be in a place that's powerful enough to affect change for every other echelon that they had been through. But he was like, the thing is, each time that you do that, you change, and so
Right.
then you get up to a place of power or influence, and you are a different person because the things that we do, like the principles that we live by, actually shape the type of person that we become, which is why I think he's so keen on those principles, that which is interesting because it goes back to that destination or journey thing. And if you sacrifice one for the other, um, then you're going to get to the destination and be the a different type of person than when you set out. And because we're incarnational, um, like the things that we do shape the type of person that we become. But that's also true on the flip side, that if you do live a life based off of the good and aimed at the good, then when you get to home, you'll be prepared, with a type of heart and a type of virtue and a type of person that that actually is good. Um, yeah, and I always appreciated that point, because the little ways that we compromise, maybe that's not the right way to say it, but the ways that we live in untruth for some greater good that we're aimed at, actually can kind of mar us and change us.
It's very much like what you've been talking about with leadership. And this guy that asks you, like, where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years? And at first interpreting that to be like, what kind of job do I want to do? Or what kind of influence do I want to have versus what kind of character,
Hmm.
you have potential to grow. And part of that will be not just in a vacuum, like becoming a more virtuous or holy person, but in the dynamic of the life that we are living as
In a context. Yeah.
priests, which it is a job or is a career. At least that's an aspect of what we do. It's much more than that. Obviously, it's this vocation, this calling, this relationship to God and to the church. But you do step through, like, and okay, now you can be a pastor. Now you can be this or whatever, because you have these technical competencies and whatnot. So taking those things serious, not trying to be like so unsullied by the corrupt nature of institutions, even the church, to be like, oh, I just do whatever the bishop tells me to do, or what, that kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
as if that's an option,
Yeah.
um,
Right.
that I'll just be this angelic, unsullied person, or I'll be this careerist kind of crass, cynical
Clergyman.
bachelor who's just kind of working his way up the ladder or something like
Yeah.
that. That you can be, you can be truly human, like body and spirit, career and vocation, by this character idea. But even that we talked about is relational. Who you become is related to the people that you work with and are influenced by, and who you influence, and all that stuff. But keeping your eye on the prize, I think that's why principles are so helpful. And guys who are into that kind of leadership thing, organizational health, culture, things like that, are like, what are the behaviors that are just non-negotiable? What are the things that we just always do?
Yeah,
And I like Peterson's always tell the truth, or at least don't lie. I think that that kind of candor just means like you will never say or do something you really don't believe, or at least if you have to get on board with the organization going a certain direction, you will at least not lie. There's that Joe Pug song that I played for you the other day, After Curfew, I think it's on his couple albums ago, but it's just about, there's this line about, your father, the finest man I ever knew, spoke a truth that was clean as an island. They gave him every chance to repeat the party line, and he shattered their windows by his silence. So they took him out back in the rain and made him an example. You are not fragile. Like, I don't know. He just paints this picture of this guy who's, I don't know what he does for a living, or what, what's the party line, or what, but that kind of man I want to be. Where if it gets to the point where I have to say something or agree with something that I think is fundamentally wrong, I'd rather be taken out back and made an example. And that shatters your windows. That's a loud life, even though all you did is just didn't say something.
I mean, that's the Franz Jägerstätter. That's
Maximilian
the
Kolbe.
Thomas
like,
More.
how do you get to that point where that's who I want to be? Holiness is where I want to arrive at.
Yeah.
But like that happened through choices. And
yeah.
But I think, what has deepened in me a lot in the last, like, kind of articulating some of that stuff in the last couple of months, whether you call it a form of leadership or character or holiness, is like, ultimately that's not totally an individual internal thing, because it impacts others. Like, it's not about you. Then. So like, you have your framework for the question of growth and like desire for growth is off if it's just about you. Like, that's an immature way to think about it.
Yeah. Or even like, wow, that's so cool. I wish I were Maximilian Kolbe, because everybody would know how great I am.
I know. Dude, I do that. It's so bad, man.
Yeah.
It's like playing the game of like the last shall be first, and so you run to the last so that you can be the first. It's the same desire,
right?
It's to be first. That's what I want, man. A lot of the young people, the youths that I work with, and many of them are like very unchurched, but have signed up with this organization to be a part of a team, be a part of something bigger than themselves, at least to escape something that, harsh family background or for whatever reason. And many of them will pursue and move through life with like a kind of consequentialist strategy. And it's very hard to get them to think in any other way. And so a lot of their decisions is just based off of the immediate consequence. And even the way that the Army responds to them tries to negate bad behavior and promote good behavior. It's all like kind of carrot stick type stuff. And I just don't think like what we're talking about is a different way to go through life, a different way to journey. And I have had a hard time. I think when I talk to people one-on-one, that's able to be communicated. But on like kind of a larger scale, I have found that to be a real challenge in ministry here, because it's so incentive, like consequential based. So here's an example: don't drink and drive, because you'll get kicked out of the Army and you'll lose all your money and you'll lose your family and you won't have a job. Like, well, how about you don't drink and drive, because like you might kill somebody or or it's not a good thing to do. So don't do it because it's not good.
But even then, you're arguing with them through consequences. Like, it's not,
But no,
you'll kill
you're
somebody.
like consequences, but that's still. I see what you mean though. Like that's a different playing field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's hard. I'm saying like you can lead a horse to water, but at some point, and this gets to I want to be Maximilian Kolbe because people will know my name. That's that's at the end of the day, what's going on there when we have those feelings is I need to feel special and loved and important and for my life to matter and to be beautiful and meaningful. And what I'm thinking will make that happen is if everybody knows my name, or if they make holy cards of me, or if people are telling this story in homilies of my life. And that really won't actually, that's not actually what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a relationship with God that's home, the place where everything belongs to me. You are always with me. That destination, which is the relationship, which also gives me my character, my identity.
There's
But you know what I mean? Like you trying to get a person to come to that conclusion. It's the same thing why you can't argue yourself into being free of that consequentialist or selfish incentive based. Like, why be a good person? Because it'll make you feel good somehow. But to like be the truly human image of God, where like everything, you're just an unselfconscious gift to God, and you receive His gift of Himself to you, and you enter into that perfect dynamic of love. That's holiness, but it's how you get there is a total mystery. You have to just receive it and like step into that river with Jesus.
Well, it's like this could be tangential, but it's coming up. But I heard this story a long time ago, and there's no citation on it. It's just a story. So classic Three Dogs North in that way. But apparently, when John Paul II became Pope, he had been Pope like 2 or 3 years at this point, and he was getting to know the Swiss guards, and it was like late in an evening, and there was a Swiss guard with him, and he said something. It was like a personal conversation, and John Paul II like floated off just organically that like he wasn't writing poetry anymore, and the young guard that was with him asked him why, and he said I just lack context. And it was, I've always kind of like thought that was a strange but like really deep answer. I still don't really know why. Why I think it came up here again. I don't know that it fits exactly. Was that like that the type of growth or playing field or whatever we call it that we're talking about? Like it only happens in like a concrete context of someone's circumstances and life. And what's hard about it is like, yeah, you do realize is how easy it is to slip into, like, because it's reality. Like so often, like the deck is stacked for you to just have to treat things as like means to an end.
Sure.
Or but there is, I don't know, there is a path forward in it. End thought. I don't know if that fits.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, there was a line from Kreeft as well when it was actually a talk that he gave about the book Till We Have Faces, and he's kind of explaining a little bit at the end of that, and he relates it back to the book of Job, which the line just came up in our first reading for the Office of Readings, and Job is, he goes through that process where he suffers. His friends come, they sit with him, they tell him to repent, and he says, "No, no, I'm actually righteous." Like, um, and then he gives this rebuttal and kind of like calls out to God of all these things, and God has this great line like, "Gird your loins and be a man, because like I'm gonna ask you questions now." And he kind of goes into all these like deep, profound questions. Where were you when I made the heavens and the earth? And do you know the stores of hail that I have in heaven? And all these like really cool things. And at the very end, Job says to him, Lord, like I won't speak again you've answered all my questions because now I've seen you. And that's he hasn't answered he didn't answer any of his questions. Like all the accusations that he lays against God, he doesn't say any of that. But it's now I've seen you, which is the answer to my questions. Which is, I think that's the actual right dynamic to be convinced of the truth of what we're talking about. Because like you can't argue your way into it. And that's a part of the frustrating thing with, I think, like unfruitful apologetics or unfruitful conversations, is it's like a desire to convince the other into a certain position. It's like that's still a type of consequential thinking, that you're playing by consequential rules. But it's so powerful why we need real saints. It's because that's a glimpse of like seeing the real thing, which gives a type of an answer that you can't argue into.
Yeah.
But I love that line. Like, you've answered all my questions because I've seen you. That's not an exact quote. I'm bad at quoting scripture, but something
It's
like
powerful
that.
though, man.
Mm-hmm.
Which also makes sense of like why we have adoration. I love that.
Yeah. Makes me want to read Till We Have Faces
Same.
again
I was just
as
thinking
well.
that it kind of makes sense at the end of that book.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she has all this list
Yeah.
of her complaints against God.
She puts him on trial.
She puts him on trial.
And it unmasks her, not him.
Dude, also the journey and destination thing there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
She has to go through that whole process
Mm-hmm.
to be unveiled, to actually see God. I may have to read that book again.
Dude, we're dropping dimes today, man.
We got to read that book.
Well, Mike, you're a loser for not being in person with us.
I'm glad I'm with you in spirit, though.
Yeah.
You probably like that, don't you?
Dude, with you in spirit? Come on. Oh.
You y'all got to come down here, man.
I know. Yeah.
We've been talking about that.
I'm going to have a little bit of free time. I'm going to take leave in a little bit. Maybe why don't we do our like personal calendar scheduling off air?
Let me pull out my schedule here.
Yeah, well, let's pencil you in here. Okay. Yeah, hey, good chat, guys. I'm glad y'all get to spend time together. I'm jealous.
All right, later, skater.
Peace, dudes.